Gun Lap Hour, Doug Heorth, AM News Talk 1360. Now, 2 years ago, November the 2nd, I celebrated, if that's the right word, 27 years in Pittsburgh. This past November the 2nd, obviously, it was 27 years in Pittsburgh. When I did the 25th anniversary, John Poyster, who was then the program director, put together a special, which basically was a special entailing the 25 years worth of mediocre radio that I've put in. Celebrating 25 years of mediocrity. Anyway, it was really a well-put-together thing, and it only played a couple of times on the station. And I thought to myself, well, heck, let's drag it out. It's 2 years later, but it's around the same time of the year. What else can we say about this? Anything else? That's about it? All right. There's a lot of good stuff on here. Bob Prince and Jim Woods and Reach Cordick, and a segment with Gene Shepard, a segment with Alan King. So leave us, give a listen.
He knows nothing. He has 2-3 other guys with him, and they're just laughing it up, not making any sense.
I don't want to listen to it, so tell me when to steer a break.
I just listened to Doug Heorth talk about half hour about his bathroom habits. I mean, are you people so desperate for any kind of slut talk? I mean, doesn't he have anything to say?
They're sick like Doug.
The whole place must be sick like Doug.
For 25 years in Pittsburgh, Doug Heorth has been both entertaining and infuriating. He has taken countless phone calls, conducted hundreds of interviews with the famous and the near-famous. There have been good days and bad days, and those of us who've had the privilege to hear him across those 25 years have come to know him like a close friend. We've laughed with him, laughed at him, yelled at him, hung up on him, and listened to him.
This is a special presentation from Pittsburgh's AM News Talk 1360, the Doug Heorth Silver Anniversary Celebration. A look back at Doug's 25 years on the air in Pittsburgh.
As a small child, my mother listened to the radio constantly. She worshipped and adored a man named Arthur Godfrey, who was the king of radio when I was a child and for a good many years afterwards.
Well, it's come up 8:30. You can't stop a clock.
And I picked up on Godfrey and the Little Godfreys and the Romance of Helen Trent.
Once again, we bring you the Romance of Helen Trent.
Romance of Our Gal Sunday. Can a woman from a small mining town in the West find happiness as the wife of a wealthy and titled English lord? His name was Henry Brinthorpe. Her rival's name was Cynthia Swanson. I dug on this as a very small child, and then rock and roll came along, got my first record player, got my first radio, and rock and roll I wanted to be Alan Freed, the king of the rock and rollers. What's the word with this rockin' bird? It's Niagara with one hot hitting heavyweight after another. BMI with more music than Emily Ty in New York Turf. Hey, Daddy, oh, mommy, oh, this is Jocko E. Fiddly-Acko. This is Jock Great Googa Mooga. Ooh, Papa Doyster. I want to be John Poyster. I picked up on that as a kid, man. I was hooked.
Doug actually ended up in radio by way of pest control and Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
The 60s came along, alcoholism came along, a variety of other things came along which sort of delayed it. I got sober in Florida in March of 73, and I pretty much put my childhood dreams aside, got involved in the pest control business where I was making a very good buck, but the dream never left me. And then I started listening to Florida radio, which was nothing like New York radio, i.e. it wasn't nearly as good. And one night in listening to this talk show, the guest was the program director. Not a good format to have the program director on taking phone calls, just as a warning to John Poyster. Anyway, I'd never called a radio station in my life, and for the hell of it, I gave him a call, asked him a couple of setup questions, and I said, does what you do require talent? And the program director said, of course it does. Why do you ask? And I said, well, I've wanted to do it from the age of 5. I've never done it, but I know I'm better than anybody on your station. I can tell you that right now. Well, the guy got ticked, but he was also very sharp. He said, you think you're so darn good? You come on down here tomorrow, and I'll put you on for the air. We'll give you an on-air audition. We'll call you Rocky Douglas, the 1,000,000-to-1 shot. This is after the motion picture Rocky. So I went down the next night. They gave me 5 minutes of training on a board. I played records, answered phones, pushed buttons, read copy, and it's the closest thing to a religious experience that I've ever had, because I'd never even been in a radio station in my life, and here I was actually doing it. And at the end of the hour, I said to myself, I have to do this. I have to do it. So I bought out of my partnership in the pest control industry, went to a broadcasting school, not affiliated with CBS, and about 6 months after that, that same radio station, now under new management, needed a guy to do Sunday midnight to Monday morning 5:30 a.m., and I wound up with a gig. wound up getting more work there, full-time work there, and then in 1980 I came to Pittsburgh.
The year was 1980, and the Doug Heorth Show debuts in the evening on a radio station in Pittsburgh that no longer exists.
Of all of the 723 interviews I've done of the on the seventh game and writing generally, this has been the most terrific and the most surprising. So I not only say thank you, all guests say thank you. Hey, it was terrific.
Why was there not more cynicism with the Warren Commission report? Why were we as Americans, and why was the media so ready, willing, and able to accept that thing without barely a question at all? I've often wondered what it would have been like had there been a Woodward and Bernstein around in the mid-'60s.
Well, good questions. You ask very good questions. Gee, you ought to be an interviewer.
If we are to assume, and this is an old argument that I don't necessarily buy in toto myself, but if we are to assume that we are living in a, quote, semi-sick society, the music then becomes a reflection of that society, and as opposed to becoming an alternative, is merely carrying the sickness one step further.
It was an exciting time for Doug. He was on the air in the Steel City.
First experience that I really and truly remember in Pittsburgh was coming into town that weekend. It was election 1980, and the first thing I heard was a commercial for Gus Hall, who was the Communist Party candidate for the presidency of the United States. And I remember saying to myself, well, you're in the big time now, baby. You're in the big time. It was a thrill. You know, we're talking major market. I came from Fort Lauderdale to Pittsburgh, and it was 5 hours a night, 5 hours a week. The sixth night of the week, I did an oldie show. I mean, I was just, it was glorious. It was all brand new to me. I did dating shows and trivia shows and nostalgia shows, and I talked to teenagers one night a week. I did every weird, mysterious, spooky thing I could possibly think of. And to say I loved every minute of it sounds ridiculous, but the truth is I loved every minute of it then. I love every minute of it now.
In an era when most talk shows pretty much sounded alike, Doug's show was a revelation. He actually engaged the listener, asked them to join the party. One of the best remembered of Doug's early program shticks was the talent show. This is when he would ask listeners to perform over the phone and on the air.
Just put the telephone down and kind of sing into it, okay? Okay.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
She's from Spain. Her name's Charo.
Charo, all right, let's hear it.
You know her?
Yes.
Okay, here it goes.
Bésame, bésame mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Bésame, bésame mucho, que tengo miedo perderte después. Ay, cuchi cuchi you.
This is Phil.
It's interesting, in listening to old tapes, I had a much more relaxed pace, much more, slow, rhythmically speaking, conversationally speaking. When I went into Afternoon Drive a number of years ago, I was told, turn the ratchet up. And I turned it up, and I've never turned it back down. Radio is much faster. It's much more excitable, much more emotional. It's just more quickly driven than it was years ago in terms of talk radio, telephone talk radio.
So gradually, Doug became a part of Pittsburgh. Not an easy task in a city that doesn't often take kindly to out-of-towners. But he won over listeners and was in turn won over by the city.
The first time I felt like a Pittsburgher is when somebody said to me, as opposed to, oh, you're the guy from Jersey, oh, you're the guy from the North Side. Because I was living on the North Side at the time. I said, man, if they're identifying as a North Sider, I'm home free, baby. I'm in Pittsburgh.
Coming up next, we've got Joe Franklin, we've got Gene Shepard on the Doug Heorth Anniversary Special.
This is the Doug Heorth Silver Anniversary Celebration Special on Pittsburgh's AM News Talk 1360.
It doesn't take a new listener to Doug's show long to pick up on some of his favorite people. Sometimes those people have been, well, odd characters who could only exist because of broadcasting's never-ending hunger for personalities, any personalities. One of those people was the decidedly quirky New York area broadcaster Joe Franklin. Insomniac Pittsburghers who had cable TV back in the 70s and 80s might have seen Franklin's show on New York's Channel 9, which was funneled into Pittsburgh for years. But it took Doug to make Franklin's New Yorkness an in-joke here in the Steel City.
You'd get sick, you're home, you turn on the television 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I was a little boy in Jersey, and there he was, WOR-TV, the Joe Franklin Show, the Memory Lane program, and he would show silent movies. He used to talk about Snub Pollard and Ben Turpin and all of the greats. And then he would have these guests on that I had never heard of. And he'd say, here he is, the greatest singer that ever lived, Lou Lipschitz. And I'd sit there and say, who is Lou Lipschitz? I don't know Lou Lipschitz. And then the next day he would have on the greatest jeweler that you ever met. And then he would have these panels. I still can remember seeing Mary McCarthy, the great writer, sitting there with a professional juggler. And I think the third guest was Henry Kissinger and a guy with a dog act. And Mary McCarthy had this look on her face as, why is this man here with dogs juggling? And Joe would go, isn't it wonderful? Let's talk to the dog. Dog, what do you think about Vietnam? Henry Kissinger, how do you feel about canines? And I just essentially said, this is ridiculously stupid and wonderful and marvelous. And it turned out I had a lot of company, because other kids would get sick and they'd stay home and watch this guy too. It got to the point, he was the one reason you wanted to get back to school in a hurry. But I just got the biggest kick out of him, and years later I had the opportunity to interview him. Sure enough, at the end of the interview or somewhere, he said, Doug Heorth, one of the greats.
I didn't discuss. Sometimes I'll be introduced to the banquet. They'll say, this is Joe Franklin who discovered so-and-so. Nobody discovers, but I gave the first exposure ever to people such as Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, Joan Rivers, Flip Wilson, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Barbara Streisand, Bette Midler, Liza Minnelli, and about maybe 30 more like that. So I've
not exactly lightweights.
No complaints, right?
Woo, none whatsoever. Where did you Pacino? What was he doing when he was on your show?
He was in a little off-road. I think he was the landlord of a building in Greenwich Village. And people always wonder how many of those people come back. The answer is, except for Bill Cosby and maybe Tony Orlando, very few come back because it's, I don't know how to say it. I sort of symbolize to them, Doug, the time when they were broke. I represent to them the time when they didn't have any money, and when they see me, I guess they're reminded of those days. It's kind of shallow, but I guess it's human nature. Shallow or not as human. Maybe I'd be the same. Who knows? But I'm just happy that I had them once,
Yeah, but Woody has never forgotten you.
No.
You were wonderful in Broadway Danny Rose when you interviewed Nick Apollo Forte. How did that come in? Would he give you a call and say, "Hey, Joe, I want you in this movie that I have no script, that I will not tell you the title for"?
Woody, yeah, you're very perceiving, Doug. Woody watches me every night, by the way, and I'm mentioned roundaboutly or seen in every Woody Allen movie.
I know that.
If he's watching a TV show in the movie, it'll be my show. You'll hear my theme song. You hear me talking about one of my clients, or else he'll show a book on a table, a book that I wrote, like a little Alfred Hitchcock touch, a little cameo Joe Franklin.
That's true. You're in all of his films.
Yeah, somewhere by hook or crook, by innuendo, or just a very subtle hint.
Author Gene Shepard was another New Yorker that Doug introduced to Pittsburgh listeners long before he hit it big nationally.
Guy told me I was 14, 15 years old. You got to hear this guy do this rambling talk show. His name is Gene Shepard. He's on every night from 10 to midnight. I says, what does he do? And the guy said he talks. Well, what does he talk about? Talks about the military, talks about baseball, talks about life as a child in the Middle West. And I just fell in love with the guy. I thought he was the greatest thing since Rap Gum. Bought all of his books. He wrote for Playboy for a number of years, National Lampoon. I'm in Florida just getting into radio, only been in it for a very short time. Found out he had a winter place in Davie, Florida, a little ranch as a matter of fact. Made inquiries, had him on a show a number of times in Florida in studio. Now you got to understand, I'm interviewing one of my radio gods. and he's on the other side of the console, and I'm calling him Shep, and he's calling me Doug, and I'm saying, there's something the matter here. He should be over here. I've listened to you since I was a little boy. Then I got up here to Pittsburgh and continued to interview him up until the early 80s. His short stories, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash, ultimately became the basis for maybe one of the most successful holiday movies of all time, a Christmas standard called A Christmas Story.
I popularized the Twinkie.
How did you come to popularize the Twinkie?
Well, because I did a thing in an off-Broadway review that I wrote, and then I later did it on radio about how when I was a kid, I said, you look at people, really official people like Jimmy Carter or people like President Reagan and so on, and you never can think of them as kids. If they were kids, if they were really walking around kids, did they have the same hang-ups that we did? Like hiding under the steps in the basement, all that stuff. And I says, now how can I ever explain to an interviewer that when I was a kid, I had a fantastic secret monkey on my back? I really did, and it was Twinkies. All the time when I got money, my mother would give me some money to go to the store or something, and I'd get my allowance. I didn't go down and buy baseball cards that guys like Robert Klein apparently did. They all do the right things. They play stickball and all that. I wonder whether they ever did. Now in their act they did, you see. But I never did any of that stuff, and I never was ready. What I did was go down to Mattingly's, and I would buy Twinkies.
Coming up, Doug with some Pittsburgh broadcasting legends.
What was Archie's big deal? Twinkies. And Shepard used to get very ticked off because a lot of people would rip his stuff off. And he told me, he says, a lot of the writers listen to my show, and that's where they got it. Now, true or false, God only knows. A Twinkie is, a funny enough name in and of itself, but I can remember Shepard doing that Twinkie bit as a kid. They're doing a thing, too. They have this celebration. I think the movie was made like in Cleveland or something like that. And all of the cast members, with the exception of Ralphie and the lady who plays his mother, gather for this yearly thing. I want to say it's Cleveland, Ohio, but it could be Toronto, Canada. I honest to God don't know. But the house that Ralphie was in, and apparently there's quite a convention of these people. That movie has developed a cult following. Most people do not know that there was a sequel, which was god-awful. It starred Charles Grodin.
Those sequels are.
Which probably explains why it was it was just terrible. Why they didn't bring Darren McGavin back. Maybe they didn't offer him enough money. I don't know. But the thing was the worst. But, as has been told a million times about Christmas Story, the movie itself was not a hit. It became a hit when Turner started showing it on Christmas Eve. And then, of course, they ultimately turned it into that 24-hour Ralphie-thon, or whatever the heck it is you call it. Anyway, we'll be back. 5:30 a.m. News Talk 1360.
Part of the fun of listening to the Doug Heorth Show was and is his fascination with his fellow broadcasters. When on-air people get together, they invariably share stories. And some legendary Pittsburgh broadcasters have shared some outstanding moments with Doug, like the time when he reunited the great Reg Cordick with some of the characters that were part of his well-remembered morning show.
I'd like to talk to your guest, Steve Darby. Hello, Steve?
Max Scorpendigus, I figured you'd be there in town with the with the big deal
I
in
was just
Oakmont.
kidding you a little bit.
I
Is that
beg your
really
pardon?
you, huh?
Yeah, that's me. Is that you?
Oh, I'm out here at the golf links at the U.S. Open out in Oakland, and I thought I'd give you a little buzz when I heard you was in town in that.
Right. I think it's great they have the golf tournament in Oakland there.
Yeah, well, I actually, I haven't moved here since the storm. I'm somewhere between the first and the ninth hole.
Uh-huh.
In the rough.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I'm really in the rough here, Reader.
As rough as ever, huh?
Yeah.
Hiya, Chub.
Oh, you dear 455 pounds of loveliness. Brunhilde, how are you, my dear?
500 now.
Up to 5?
Yes,
That's marvelous.
You put a little weight on when you get older.
I'm so happy for you.
Yeah, are you still as extinguished looking as you always was?
I got it.
You put me right through to Cordick.
He's on.
Cordick, you owe me interest
on 18 years of 13 paper clips and 4 rubber bands. Now, do you have any idea what that comes to?
Now, Mr. Murchison, I told you the check was in the mail.
Don't give me that, Cordick. I've heard that from you for 18 years.
Well, let me try something else.
I'm listening, Cordick.
Mr. Murchison, the mean, rotten boss. Carl, how are you doing?
Fine, Reed.
Carl
How about
Hartman,
you?
ladies and gentlemen.
Carl, is Louis the garbage man with you tonight?
Yes, he is. Just a minute.
Okay.
Wait, would you come over here, please? Say hello. Hello? Who's this?
Louis,
It's your brother Bobich.
how are you? How's Catherine?
Oh, all right. Catherine, my truck machine.
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful.
The last time I saw Catherine was on the cover of the magazine of Better Homes and Garbage.
All right. You remember?
Do I remember? I have it here on my wall.
Louis, is Roquefort with you this evening?
Roquefort. Oh, you mean that funny guy with the little skinny mustache and plastered down hair?
That's the one.
Yeah,
Never mind
you
about
don't
his
know
funniness.
Hey, you, Spooky,
Roquefort
come over here.
Lafarge is one of the dear announcers left over from the days of the Blue Network.
Uh-huh.
Hello?
Goes back.
Hello.
Hello,
This is
Roquefort.
Roquefort Lafarge.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Who's this, please?
This is Mr. Cordick, remember?
Oh, really?
At one time or another, we did a radio show together.
Mr. Cordick. Of course
Roquefort
I remember.
Lafarge.
Here's the great pirate broadcaster Bob Prince.
But invariably, wherever I go, somebody will say, "What do you hear from Mungie?" Now, you wouldn't know about that, but we have a great PA announcer in Pittsburgh. His name is Art McKinnon. Mm-hmm. We're at Forbes Field, and the Possum and I are doing a ball game. This is before Nellie joined us, and we were down to just the 2 announcers. And the tag end of the season, we're playing the Cincinnati Reds, and they bring up everybody, 40 players, and we're winning the game, and it's in the 8th or 9th inning, and we only need one more out, and it's over, and we're bored. We want to get the heck out of the booth. Let's get out of here. So we're winning big, and all of a sudden this guy comes up, and I don't know who he is. Because, I had not seen him. He hadn't been a regular player. It turned out he was Bobby Adams, an old veteran they brought back up. So anyhow, just as I'm ready to say they're bringing in a new batter, Doug, Art McKinnon made us. I looked at Woods and I says, "Who's this donkey?" I cut the microphone. I says, "Who's this donkey?" And the Possum says, "I don't know." We're talking, and we bring the mic back up, and about just at that time, I hear McKinnon say, "Mungie." What he was saying was, "Will Rab Mungie please call his office?" It was an announcement. So I said, "This is Mungie batting for so-and-so." And then I said to the Possum, "Who is Mungie?" And then Woodsy looked, he says, "I don't know, but he sure has aged." Well, we started to laugh like you're laughing. And I had people tell me that they had left the ballpark and were listening to the game on their way home or back to the office. In those days, we played a lot of day ball,
Yeah.
And they said that Woodsy and I started to laugh so when we realized what had happened. We're so happy we could never sign off the air. We just absolutely busted. And just laughing like you are, only with tears rolling out our eyes. And they had to come in with organ music and sign us off from the downtown studio. There was no way we could finish. I had people tell me they actually stopped their cars where they were driving and pulled off on the side of the road and laughed because the tears were coming out their eyes too. Well, that was one of my monumental boo-boos, and I lived by it. And the other one is the can of corn. 71, we got the doggone championship all locked up, and Blast is pitching, and we only need one out, and it's all over, and there's a big high fly ball hit out in the center field, and man, I'm ecstatic. We're going to be the champions of the National League. Oh, this is great, of the National League East. And I'm saying, there goes a big old can of golden bantam corn out in the center field, and then I almost said the one thing that I've never, thank goodness, knock on wood, I almost let fly every epithet in the world on the radio, because I'd been watching Matty Alou out in center field. The wind was blowing a gale in from center field. And I thought to myself, you dumb donkey, you're playing too deep, and you should have known about the wind. And this guy hit the high fly ball to center field, and Alou misses it by about 10 feet. This great big golden can of golden bantam corn, a can of corn, you know the expression. Right. Well, it drops in. But by the time it dropped in, the Cubs, Ron Santo, I'll never forget it, and all of them, DeRocha had left the Cub dugout on the third base side, at Wrigley Field, Doug. He just went down this line. They were on their way to the dugout. Meanwhile, all the Pirates are coming in and jumping on Blast, all but Alou, because we've now won the championship. But he didn't get the ball, and we ended up losing the game. A kid by the name of Arcia hit a 2-run homer off Blast and beat us in the ball game. as a result of Lou dropping that can of corn.
And then, of course, there's Myron Cope.
I love the newspaper stories. You also tell a story about a guy named Fred P. Alger.
Yes.
And a little habit that he had.
The habit. Oh, Fred was in his 70s at the time, I would suppose. He was an old guy. He'd fought in that war in China. I forget which one it was. Was it the Boxer Rebellion?
Boxer Rebellion, yeah.
Yeah, he was a Marine. And then he'd been our high school writer for God knows how many decades. And, he sat there in a hunter's cap at his typewriter and a bandana backwards around his throat and a checkered plaid hunting shirt. And he typed with two gnarled fingers. And while typing away, he would pause and spit his tobacco into a spittoon at his feet. But he wasn't accurate. So I'm this punk, I just joined the department. Bingo, he's hitting me on the pants cuffs. So I said, Mr. Alger, you're hitting me on my trousers. And he grumbled, damn, you young punk, and went on pecking away with two fingers. So I went across the street to a saloon that had no name, but everybody knew it as Benny's, owned by a guy named Benny Samuels. All of us got there, as well as cab drivers. Louis Armstrong would come in when in town. It was a real great mixture of people. But I went across to Benny's and bought a packet of mail pouch. Went back to the office. I'd never chewed. Stuffed my jaw full of chew, which I came to like, by the way, and chewed for some years. Horrors. But anyhow, next time he hit me in the pants, I hit him back. And this went on through a few salvos, and he started taking aim on his spittoon, and that was the end of the problem.
Coming up, Doug's favorite moment on the air, his most embarrassing moment on the air, and what he calls his best interview.
This is the Doug Heorth Silver Anniversary Celebration Special on Pittsburgh's AM News Talk 1360.
In 25 years, Doug has interviewed hundreds of people, so getting him to pick favorites is not an easy task.
The classic, my buddy Stash the Fan and I would get into these arguments all the time about was or was not Vince Scully in a rock and roll film. And I knew darn good and well Vince Scully had never been in that movie. And again, Vince Scully was my idol and still is my idol to this day. We were doing a show one Saturday, and we got into this stupid debate on the air again. And I finally said, my gosh, why don't we call Scully? The Dodgers are in town. Had the producer call. Scully was eating breakfast, said, call back in a half an hour. I'll be happy to talk to you. A half an hour later, we call back. A half an hour later, I am on the phone with my idol, a guy I've been listening to since I was a small boy. It's Vince Scully. And I still have the tape of it. He said, hello, dog, as only Vince Scully could say. And I practically fell off the chair. I said, my God, this is what it is all about. I will never forget that one. That was only a phone interview.
Maybe when the Dodgers finally climbed the mountain and beat the Yankees in the World Series in '55, that might have been.
Did you broadcast that then?
Yes, I was on the last half. Mel Allen and I did that World Series, and as it turned out, I was doing the last half of the game, so that when the Dodgers won, I said on the air, ladies and gentlemen, the Brooklyn Dodgers are the champions of the world, and I shut up. And all winter, people asked me, how could you have remained so calm? But the truth was that I was close to tears, and I couldn't have said another word if my life depended.
I hate to brag. I've done many interviews that I think were fabulous, spectacular, wonderful, marvelous, and those were its bad points. But interestingly enough, I interviewed the comedian Alan King back in the 80s, and I had watched Alan King on television for many years, found him to be quite funny. In fact, I've actually adapted certain things that Alan King did, stylistically speaking. The point is the interview was as perfect an interview as I have ever done. I have listened back to that interview 6, 7, 8 times. There is not a single word, not a single breath pause that I would change about that interview. It was just absolutely positively perfect. So that's the one that most immediately springs to mind.
Okay, Doug. I have 3 brothers that are doctors. And I was doing a play on Broadway, 1964, The Impossible Years. I'd been on the road breaking it in. We had a lot of problems with the play. It ended up it was a smash hit. They made a movie out of it with David Niven, who I was very thrilled. I was able to tell everybody, David Niven played me in the movie because he was the classiest guy I ever knew, one of the classiest guys. Anyway, I end up sick. I go to the hospital in the newspapers carries a complete exhaustion, which is a rich man's disease, you know. I never heard of a poor man being admitted to a hospital for complete exhaustion. I mean, I'd like to see a poor man walk into a hospital and say, I'm completely exhausted. I'd like to lay down here for you. They tell you lay in the gutter. You know? Anyway, it's a very, very long story, but I promise I'd get you to the punchline. I had a nurse that if I was sick when I got there, she just tore me apart. She treated me like I was 3 years old. Nurses do that, you know. And she kept saying to me, did you enjoy your din-din? And I said, I don't eat din-din. My children don't eat din-din. In the morning she would say, how was your brekkie-wekkie? Every morning, oh, good Lord, the thought of it. Every morning she would bring me apple juice on a brekkie-wekkie tray. And I never ordered apple juice. Every night I'd fill out the menu, you know, cross, circle, check what else you got to do. I never ordered apple juice every morning. It must have been a run. Somebody was pushing apple juice in the hospital. And I said, I don't drink apple juice. I hate apple juice. 6 o'clock in the morning, every hospital does it. They come around with the little urine analysis vials, you know, the little bottles. And I decided, being my father's son, I was going to get even. I was going to make sure that they'd remember me in this hospital, and that nurse would never forget me. One step forward for mankind. I took the apple juice, and I poured it into the urine vial. And I felt better already, you know. I said to myself, I wish I could be at the laboratory when all them scientists are sitting around trying to figure out, what is this? But my nurse spoiled it. She came in, she picked up the vial, shook it violently, as they do in the old-fashioned nurses. She looked up into the light and said, my, we're a little cloudy this morning, aren't we? And I said, well, maybe we got to run it through again. I drank it, and she fainted.
Alan King's revenge.
And his most embarrassing moment on the air?
Very early on in the career, I was doing a public affairs show, and I had two sightless women on, American Association for the Blind, whatever the heck it was. And the funny thing is, the aftermath is, I never did see these girls get out of a car or get back into the car before or after the interview. I was still not sure how they got to the radio station because we were in the middle of nowhere, and I thought, boy, if they were sightless, I sure hope they weren't driving. At any rate, the one girl had the most beautiful pale blue eyes I had ever seen up to that point in time, and I could not take my eyes off of her eyes. We're about to take a commercial. I said, you know, Joanne, you may be blind, but I'm telling you, you have the most beautiful blue eyes I have ever seen in my life. She said, thank you, they're not mine. And I did not know what to do. I think I apologized for the remaining 30 minutes of the interview. Oh, how was I to know? But I just felt awful. That one stays with me.
And what about the one interview that Doug has never been able to do?
My dream interview would be Thomas Jefferson. Okay, that's a couple hundred years too late on that. And Sinatra would have been fun to talk to, just for the sake of being in the same room as Sinatra. I remember the first time I went to see him perform, I was in the front row and I had a cold, and I kept saying to myself, geez, I'm so close. If I sneeze, I sure hope Frank doesn't pick up any germs. Sinatra would have been the one I just would have loved to have shared some time with, because as far as I'm concerned, when Frank died, every other singer in America, or every other singer in the world, I should say, moved up a notch.
Coming up, hearing voices with the likes of Mel Blanc and Phil Hartman on the Doug Heorth Silver Anniversary Show.
This is the Doug Heorth Silver Anniversary Celebration Special on Pittsburgh's AM News Talk 1360.
As one of the many program directors who have had the opportunity to work with Doug over the last 25 years, he and I have often discussed his talent for doing impressions. Now, I've told him not to do voice characterizations because they all sound to me like the character Frank Pantangeli from the movie Godfather 2.
Family senator. I was in the olive oil business with his father. Ah, well, the FBI guys. So I said, yeah, Michael Corleone this and Michael Corleone that, but it's all lies. The interesting sidebar to that story, Michael V. Gaza, who played Frank Pantangeli, he was originally a playwright. I don't want to give you the biography of the man. The important thing is he was drunk during that famous scene.
bombed out of his mind. They went to Coppola. They said, you can't do that now. The man is too intoxicated. Coppola said, bring him in here. We're going to shoot it and see what happens. And it became a classic scene in Godfather 2. By the way, my Ed Sullivan impression, right here in Austin, George Bush, my fellow Bill Clinton, Americans, nice to be here. They don't all sound like Frank Fantasia. That's a lie.
But Doug has actually done some other impressions well enough to fool some listeners. One of his favorites was the time he convinced a listener he was actually talking to Channel 4 anchor Michelle Wright.
Hi, this is Michelle Wright. Can I help you?
Yeah, Michelle.
Yes.
You give a name of a doctor and his phone number for leg cramps.
Yes.
And I didn't get it all.
All right, do you have a pencil?
Yeah.
All right, the doctor's name, Vinny, V as in Victory, I, N as in Ninny, N as in Ninny, I, E as in Edward, and his last name, Boombop.
Boombop?
Boombop.
How you spell
B
that?
as in boy, O as in Ollie, O as in Ollie, M as in Mary, B as in boy, A as in Abel, C as in Thomas, Z as in Zebra. Dr. Vinny Boombop.
Boombop.
No, sir. Sir, say it correctly.
What's the phone?
Boombop.
Yeah, Boombop. What's the phone number?
No, Boombop, sir. Boombop.
Buck.
No, Bop. It's B-A-T as in Thomas, Z.
B-A-T?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, now say it for me.
Vinny Boombop.
That's exactly right, sir.
All right, what's the phone number?
Didn't the young man give you that number?
No.
Now, hold on a second. Do you like my newscast?
You know what?
Do you like my newscast?
You knew what?
Do you like my newscast?
Newscast, yeah.
Yes. Don't you think I do a nice job?
Yeah, you're very good.
Now, I'm thinking of going blonde. Do you think I should go blonde?
Well, personally, I like blondes.
You like blonde. You think I should go blonde? Now, what do you think of...
You are a little dark. I mean...
yeah.
If you go blonde, it'll make a hell of a big difference.
What do you think of my co-anchor, Mike Clark?
Well, mostly they listen to you.
And over the years, Doug has had the chance to talk to some of the best impressionists in the business. Here's Doug with Phil Hartman.
Jack Nicholson.
Well, Jack Nicholson falls into the category of a voice that's very similar.
Get in
to
a little
my
tighter
own.
on that mic. A little tighter.
Jack's voice is very similar to mine in its timbre and its quality, and there are several actors who fall in that area. Like I always felt that John Wayne and I have a very similar voice. If I take my own voice and put it down in my chest, down in here, sounds a lot like the Duke. It has a certain rhythm, and that's the way it is. If I take it up into the back of the throat, it becomes more like Jack. And if I take my voice and push it way up into the nasopharynx area, all of a sudden you have Mr. Nicholson.
And this is Doug with the great Mel Blanc.
We could call it, I guess, the Mel Blanc School of Method Acting. How you came up with the voice of Porky Pig?
Well, I went out to a pig farm. Let's put it this way. And I wallered around with the pigs for a couple of weeks. And then I came back into the radio studio, and they kicked me out and said, "Go home and take a bath." Which I did. When I come back again, I said, if a pig could talk, he would talk with a grunt. You know, oink, 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 oink. That's why Porky Pig got his voice with a grunt.
Was the stutter in there right from the start, Mel?
Well, no, it's actually he grunted, you know, oink, 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 oink. It sounds so much like a stunner that I thought I'd talk like a big grunt.
I've got to ask you the obvious question. I know you've told us a zillion times, but in the book and elsewhere when you speak on college campuses, you have described him as a, quote, tough little stinker.
Oh, yeah, Bugs. They wanted me to get a voice for this rabbit. They were going to call him the Happy Hare. And then they were going to have him say, "Hey, what's cooking?" And I went to Leon Schlesinger, who was in charge of this Warner Brothers Studios at the time, and I said, "Why don't you change the name? Name him after the guy that drew the first picture of him." And his name was Bugs Hardaway. Why don't you call him Bugs Bunny?
And he thought that was a good idea. And then I said, instead of that corny expression, hey, what's cooking, why don't you use a modern expression, which was modern then? This is, hey, what's up, Doc?
In the 25 years he's been on the air here in Pittsburgh, Doug has had the chance to talk to some of the great comedians like Jackie Mason and Maury Amsterdam.
The only field where you don't have to apply for a job to prove your qualifications is a congressman. You want to be a doctor, you have to graduate college. A lawyer, a football player has to go to college. A congressman doesn't. That's why we got such great football players in this country and such lousy congressmen.
But it's even worse when he's president. I think there's even less qualifications to be president.
Not only less qualifications, you have to be a much bigger crook to get the job.
My wife knows that I will not write for anyone unless I know what they do. Because I said I think it has to be that type of material for that particular person. So one day when we're on a Dick Van Dyke show, one of the stagehands walks over and he says to me, hey, the president wants to talk to you. I said, you're kidding. No, President Johnson's on the phone, wants to talk to you. So I go over to the phone, and it's the president's secretary. He's Mr. Amsterdam. I says, yes. He says, President Johnson wants to talk to you. Well, I had met Johnson because JFK was a good friend of mine.
Right, I want to get into that.
We had met that way. And the president gets on. I said, yes, Mr. President, what can I do for you? And he said, Tuesday I'm being made a member of the Washington, D.C. Press Club. And I've just looked over my acceptance speech, and it's pretty dry. So I've taken the privilege of, he says, sending it to you under diplomatic pouch. He says, you should be getting it sometime today, and I appreciate it. You just, pepping it up a little bit so it'll be funnier for the guys there. So I said I'd be very happy to do it. Now I get home, and I said to my wife, how do you like that, honey? My wife, I got a call from the president, wants me to write some jokes for him. She said, tell him you don't write for him when you see him work.
Here's Doug talking to Steve Allen.
I give my views on sundry subjects. And some Monday subjects. Typical stupid Steve Allen joke. Incidentally, Doug Heorth, I like you and I like your father, William Randolph Hearst.
That's exactly right.
Many people believe that broadcasting is not exactly a secure career. And at times it seems like radio stations change formats and air personnel like some people change clothes, which is why lasting 25 years on the air in one city is such an accomplishment. But there was a time when it appeared that Doug might be knocked off the air permanently in Pittsburgh. The year was 1998, and change was sweeping through the local radio industry. Doug's former station was sold, and the new owners decided to take the station in what they call another direction. That left Doug on the outside looking in. But another station in town was having some success with the talk format, and in early 1999 hired Doug. That station would, of course, be WPTT. And here's a part of the only known recording of Doug's first show on this station.
Myself. Pardon me? Well, it's early. I just got here. Hello. It's 6 minutes after 3 o'clock. It is. I'm not kidding. And guess what? My name is Doug Heorth. I hope you know who you are. If you don't, you're in big trouble because I don't know who you are. I haven't the slightest idea. And it is the first day, 3 to 6, on Pittsburgh's new talk radio station, 1360 WPTT.
And this is Greg Kuntz back at our AM News Talk 1360 studios. We hope you've been enjoying listening to the Doug Heorth Show. We're about out of time right now. We'll talk to you tomorrow on AM News Talk 1360. Have yourselves a great evening. God bless.